Today we're going to continue with the last part of the Maimer Vehaya, Bayom, Hahu, Yitoka, B'Shofar Gadol that the Rebbe said in Tafshin Chav Ches on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, 1967, and edited and gave it out to be learned on the for Rosh Hashanah Tafshin on Beis 1991. In the Maimer, we're explaining the concept of the Shofar Gadol. What is that big shofar? That big shofar that has to accomplish that very special achievement to arouse every single Jew, wherever they may be, physically and spiritually, to arouse them to come and to leave their place of constraint and to instead come and bow to Hashem in the Har HaKodesh, in the holy mountain in Yerushalayim. What is that big shofar? Why is it big? And why does it say it will be blown on its own? And the explanation is that a shofar is a cry from the very essence of the soul, something that's beyond any type of limits, beyond any type of definition, not intellect, not emotion, nothing else. It's the very essence of the soul that's called out. And that's also the meaning of the Shofar Gadol, because the regular Shofar is calling out from the very essence of the soul, but still is connected, is still in somewhat defined inside the limitations of the physical and spiritual world. That can reach someone who's somewhat connected to godliness. But in order to get those people who are in the furthest place possible, for that there's a need for a Shofar Gadol. The very essence of godliness, the revelation that comes from beyond the world totally. And that's why that revelation is one that's Yitoka, that comes on its own, because it's not defined by any type of name, or revelation, or any type of spiritual energy of godliness, but only by the very essence of godliness. And the question was, how can that happen on its own? If shofar means the coming of Mashiach, which is the continuation, the fulfillment of everything that we've done in our world now. So it's not enough that suddenly on its own, from above, there's an arousal that's arousing the people to come to Yerushalayim. It has to be something that comes as a continuation, something that comes as a fulfillment of our actions during the time of Galus. How could it be something that comes on its own? And especially since the Shofar Gadol of Mashiach is connected somewhat to the Shofar of Rosh Hashanah now. The whole point of the Shofar of Rosh Hashanah is that it's something that comes through the avodah of a person, that a person brings about Hashem's desire to be king over this world and to recreate the world, to give again from his essence to bring into the world. How then is the Shofar Gadol of Mashiach one that comes on its own, Yitoka? And the Rebbe explained that the idea of the Shofar of Rosh Hashanah as well, which is the revelation of the essence, is something that comes from the Meitzar, like the Rebbe Marash explained, that a shofar is narrow at one end and it becomes wide at the other end through the min ha-meitzar karasika, through one calling Hashem from the total meitzar, from the complete constraint of hardship, of the tough situation in which he is. From that there comes the merchav, the ultimate abundance, which is what we brought down also the idea of the explanation of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid about Tefillah Li'ani, Ki Yatev Lifnei Hashem Yishpech Sichai, that specifically a poor man, when he wraps himself totally, meaning he has nothing, and what is his entire cry, that he should call out Lifnei Havaya, the essence of Hashem. That is the idea of the Shofar Gadol of the time of Mashiach. The Oivdim and Nidachim, those who are lost, those who are totally scattered in the furthermost places in the physical and spiritual existence. The fact fact that they're scattered, the fact that they're lost, that in itself is what arouses the call of that great shofar. The nothingness, the zero, the meitzar, the greatest possible meitzar, that brings about the Yitoka, the shofar gadol that's above the world, because they don't have anything. That brings about the shofar gadol that's above the world, and that in fact even completes the idea of the galus, the places of Asher and Mitzrayim themselves, that they have reached their completion and their fulfillment by the fact that their galus that they caused is what brings about the Yitoka b'shofar gadol. And now, to explain this even more, so the Rebbe also said that that's also sometimes that there's a person whose avodah is not that he's totally lost, but yet he realizes that everything he does is nothing compared to the truth, the true greatness of Hashem. That constraint also can bring about the shofar gadol because he's not feeling himself, and therefore there's that great shofar that comes, so to speak, on its own. And now the Rebbe continues to explain that this is also the meaning that it says in Chassidus, that shofar gadol, the great shofar, is going to arouse the nekudas hayadus, the pinta leyid, the spark of Yiddishkeit that's within every single Jew. Based on that, there's an amazing idea that comes out over here. We know that in the month of Elul, which we also blow shofar in the month of Elul, and in a certain sense that also, like that shofar, as explained in Chassidus, like the shofar of Matzah Yom Kippur, also the shofar of Elul is one which is similar to the shofar gadol of Mashiach, because it's not a mitzvah, it's merely a custom, it's a minhag. It's a cry and a call from the depths of the essence of a Jew himself. What does that mean? We know regarding the month of Elul that the Alter Rebbe asks the famous question: how can we say that the month of Elul is a regular weekday? It's not a time when there's revelation from above. It's not a time of Yom Tov. Yom Tov shows on a revelation from above. The ultimate revelation from above is Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the time of Ne'ilah, when the 13 attributes of Hashem's mercy are revealed fully. And yet, then we don't do work. We don't even eat or drink. A regular Shabbos and Yom Tov, we don't do work because there's the revelation of Hashem's 13 attributes of mercy. And yet, Elul, there is that revelation on one hand, and at the same time, it's a regular weekday. And for that, Alter Rebbe gives the famous analogy of the king in the field. That the king is not in his palace, where he's revealed in a way that he inspires people through his revelation. But he's in the field where he is available to every person, but the person themselves has to awaken themselves in order to greet the king. And that's the 13 attributes of mercy, the way they're revealed in the month of Elul. Because the first of those 13 attributes of mercy is the name Kel. And a Jew is called Yisrael, meaning that the Kel, Isar, is the ruler, is the thing that's in charge, that spark of Yiddishkeit that's within him, which is the Shem Kel, the beginning of those 13 attributes of mercy. Which means the 13 attributes of mercy is not something that arouses the person, but on the other hand, it's something that gives the power to that spark of godliness that's within the person, that he should want to come close to Hashem. A similar idea the Rebbe explains over here with regard to the Yitoka b'shofar gadol. The shofar gadol of Mashiach, bringing out the very essence, it reaches the spark of godliness, the pinta leyid, the nitzutz elokus, that's within the soul of every Jew, and awakens it, so that the person himself, uvo ha'oivdim, bi'eretz Ashur, v'anidachem b'eretz Mitzrayim, v'ishtachavu l'Hashem bar HaKodesh, they themselves come, those who are lost, and far-flung, as lost as they are, as far-flung as they are. They all have a spark of Yiddishkeit, but it's covered. The shofar gadol uncovers that spark so that they themselves now come in order to bow to Hashem in Yerushalayim. Which means that the great shofar of the time of Mashiach is actually not something that comes from above, merely something above on its own. Similar to the difference between the Gula of Mitzrayim, which was in the month of Nisan, and the Gula of Mashiach, which according to some opinions is the month of Tishrei, but it certainly has in it that aspect of the month of Tishrei. Even the Nisan part of it has in it that aspect of the month of Tishrei, is that rather than the Gula, like the redemption from Egypt, which came from above totally, it was totally from above. The people were not changed, and that's why they needed 49 days to count until they can get the Torah. And even then, it was the beginning of the process. But at the end of the process, it's not going to be something that comes from above on its own. It's rather going to be something that enables and awakens that spark of godliness that's within every Jew, so that the person does the avodah. It's not an avodah that comes from above. The desire of the Jew to connect to Hashem is going to be something that comes from the person himself, and that's the idea of Rosh Hashanah, and that's why it's connected to the concept of Rosh Hashanah. However, over here we have still two aspects and two ways that this is revealed. There's the two types of people. There's those who are the ones who are inspiring, and there's those who are the ones who are becoming inspired. In the Avodah of the Shofar Gadol, as we'll see it in a moment, the concept of this Shofar Gadol has two types of people. Those who are being inspired. They are lost. They are far flung. They feel totally lost to Yiddishkeit. Something has to happen from above, and as we've explained in the previous shiurim, sometimes there's something that comes from above. Sometimes there's an inspiration from above that does something, because the person is so deep in the mud, or so deep in his lack of desire, so deep in his wanting to run away from Yiddishkeit, there has to be something that wakes the person up. And as the countless stories that there are regarding this concept, how people get this message from the Rebbe, something to wake them up. We'll say just a quick idea, something which is, if one wishes, you can open up. It's printed in the Rebbe's letters. There's a letter to a person whose uncle was known by the name of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was this is in the 50s, or in the early 60s, I think it's in the 50s, in Eretz Yisrael. There was this person, he was very involved in the what was it called? The Jewish Sochnut, the Jewish agency, in bringing Jews from different countries, from Yemen, etc. In those projects, he was very involved. And this person himself, he called himself Zerubbabel. His own Yiddishkeit, he was opposed outwardly to everything Jewish. He was one of the early Zionist freethinkers that doesn't believe in any Yiddishkeit and any type of Yiddishkeit. He never wrote a letter to the nephew of this person who lived in Kfar Chabad. He said to go to your uncle, and he gave over some messages about at least changing the outlook in a certain way regarding Yiddishkeit. And a long letter and explanation. In the end, the Rebbe says to him, you should, if you have any questions regarding this, or if you don't believe and you don't want to accept this, it should suffice that you remember what your dream was last night. You remember your dream last night. That should be something enough to make you realize that there's truth in what I'm telling you. This nephew who lived in Kfar Chabad, he got the letter, and he was a bacher in yeshiva. He was afraid, he was terrified to go to his uncle with this letter. His uncle, he knew him, he was a tough, very strongly anti-everything religious. He couldn't go to him. And so for days he didn't do anything about the letter. Days, weeks, whatever it may have been. And finally, somehow he went to his mashpia, who told him, what do you mean? You got a message from the Rebbe, go do it. If you don't want to read it to him, if you don't want to tell it to him, at least give him the letter to read himself. And so finally, when there was some occasion, he came to his uncle and he gave him the letter. He gave him the letter that he should read himself. And he was visibly moved by the letter, because he says, last night I had a dream where the Rebbe came to me in a dream. Now this is last night, the night before he got the letter. The letter was received, was sent by the Rebbe months before, and then it was received. But the point of it is that sometimes someone needs something, and it had some effect on him, even if it didn't maybe change his outlook totally, but it changed his approach to Yiddishkeit. The point of it is that sometimes a person is so distant from Yiddishkeit and he needs something from above to arouse him. But there's two types of things from above that can arouse a person. Something from above can arouse a person where he didn't change, or something can just uncover that spark of Yiddishkeit that's within him, in order that he is now able, because of his feeling of connection. Nobody took him and moved him. He himself came closer to Hashem. That's the way it has to be with the Gula, with the future Gula, and that's why that Shofar Gadol has to do that. So there are those who are oivdim and nidachim, they're so far flung and so lost from Yiddishkeit that they need something to wake them up. Then, once they're woken up, they themselves come close to Hashem. And in the deepest and strongest way, because it's the very essence of their soul that makes it happen. Then there's another thing. There's those who they do their avodah, that's the one who his mission is to inspire others. But when he contemplates and realizes that anything I'm doing is not my own, it's all the power I'm getting from above, Yitoka, then that's what brings about his avodah, what brings about by the other person. The Shofar Gadol came first, and then came his own avodah, whereas by this person it's his own avodah of bittul, of realizing how it's not me, that's what brought him to it. And that's how the Rebbe continues now to explain the idea of the lesson that there is from the Shofar Gadol, because the Rebbe asked in the beginning of the Maimer, if it's something that comes on its own, what's the lesson from it? What's there that we can do? Comes from its own, it comes from Hashem. It's a spiritual thing that comes from Hashem. What does that have to do with us? So he says, no, this is the lesson. We're now in a time when we're waiting. We're about to come to the Shofar Gadol. It's the last moments. There's about to be the big Shofar of Mashiach. And in certain ways, the Shofar of Mashiach started already. As it's understood from the Maimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and specifically the things that have happened at the time that the Rebbe said the Maimer, as we mentioned. This is in connection with the Yisayirus, the awakening and arousal that there was with the 6-Day War, and especially with the Mivtza Tefillin that started then, which as a continuation and now is 50 years. There was all the Mivtzaim that have been in the 50 years, which have been awakening the spark of Yiddishkeit in every Jew. So the lesson is a double one. The fact that the Shofar Gadol is blowing, the fact that the Shofar Gadol has been sounded and it's sounding, and it's our mission to actually bring it and to recognize that this inspiration is there, and therefore we have to reach every Jew, and at the same time that the person who does it has to realize that it's not coming from me. It's not my own avodah. It's not something that I've done on my own. It's Yitoka. It's something that happens as if on its own. So these are the two things that happen from the Shofar Gadol. The one that it reaches is Yitoka, because he's so far flung that in order to get to him it has to come on its own, but then it arouses his spark of Yiddishkeit. And there's the Yitoka, the realization that no matter what I do, all my avodah is only something which is connecting me to the avodah that comes from above. And it doesn't take away from my avodah when I realize that. On the contrary, when a person realizes that, he knows that it's not according to my limitations, because it's not me. I'm only a conduit of expressing the Yitoka from above, and therefore there's no limitation to that. There's nothing that I can say I can't do. It's all something that I can do. And this is an amazingly powerful thing, And as we mentioned also, this is the last mimer that the Rebbe edited for Rosh Hashanah up until now. It was a time also that the Rebbe wasn't editing Mamarim beforehand, and for a month afterwards also the Rebbe didn't edit. Later on, a month and a half later, the Rebbe did start again editing Mamarim. But it was sort of like a mimer in the middle of a time when Mamarim aren't being edited, which was preparing us for a time when Yitoka, when the shofar is almost sounded on its own, when we can't hear that great shofar. But really, we realize that's because that the place where it comes from is so much higher and deeper, and it's something that's supposed to bring out in us an avodah which is beyond us, which isn't an avodah that's limited and defined by anything. And the Rebbe ends off the mimer that the main thing of the shofar is it has to come down in the gashmis, in the physical world, and therefore also this shofar gadol. All the spiritual things that there are in it. The main thing is that we should hear it and have it in the physical world, the actual shofar gadol, which should bring us all to Har HaKodesh, to Yerushalayim, to all gather together in the third Beis HaMikdash.